I hope you are fine. And if you are ready, I started the class. Today I'm going to explain about temporal, ethmoid, maxilla, and mandible bones. And before starting the class, if you have a question from previous subjects for parietal, frontal, sphenoid, and occipital bone, you can ask the question. If you don't have a question and you are ready, I start the class. Are you ready? Okay, thank you. At first, I start to explain temporal bone. Temporal bone forms the infralateral part of the skull and form the base of the skull and include the four portion or four part, a squamous part, petromastoid part, and styloid process part, and tympanic part. So the temporal bone consists of four portion or four parts. In this picture, you can see the temporal bone attached to a parietal bone at the superior and inserted to sphenoid bone anteriorly and attached to occipital bone posteriorly. This is the squamous part. A squamous part is the largest portion of the temporal bone, and it has two surfaces, outer or external surface and the inner or internal surface. In this slide, you can see outer surface of squamous part, and in the outer side or outer surface, there is a sulcus, vertical sulcus for passing the middle temporal artery. This is the vertical sulcus for middle temporal artery, and at the posterior to sulcus, you can see a crest. The name of crest is supramastoid crest because this is the mastoid portion and this is supramastoid crest. A squamous part inferiorly form the external acoustic meatus and form the mandibular fossa. This is the external acoustic meatus, and this meatus lead to middle ear, and actually the wall of external acoustic meatus is formed by a squamous part and tympanic part. This is the tympanic part of temporal bone. Is a thin bony structure and a quadrangular. It has a quadrangular shape, and if you if you look at the external acoustic meatus, you can see a superior wall and upper part of posterior wall is formed by a squamous part, and inferior wall and inferior part of posterior wall of external acoustic meatus is formed by tympanic plate or tympanic part of temporal bone. And squamous part of temporal bone at the inferior produce fossa. The name of fossa is mandibular fossa because the condylar process of mandible is located in the mandibular fossa and form the TM joint, temporomandibular joint. This is the squamous part, and this is the tympanic part. Both of part of temporal bone forms the mandibular fossa. This is the mandibular fossa. Actually, the mandibular fossa has a two part, articular part and non-articular part. Articular part is produced by squamous, but the non-articular part is here is produced by tympanic plate. There is a fissure between the squamous and tympanic part in mandibular fossa is called squamo-tympanic fissure. It's here, a squamo-tympanic fissure. This fissure is located between a squamous part and tympanic part. But there is a thin bony appendage from the petrous part inside the squamotympanic fissure, and this fissure subdivided to two fissures, petrotympanic fissure and petrosquamous fissure. Petrosquamous fissure is black and there is no way anywhere. But petrotympanic fissure leads to middle ear and contain a chordotympanic branch of facial nerve. This is very, very important. In a petrotympanic fissure, contain a chordotympanic nerve from facial nerve. And finally, in the squamous part of temporal bone, you can see a zygomatic process. This is the zygomatic process. It has a two root, anterior root and posterior root. Posterior root terminate to tubercle, or articular tubercle, and anterior root is lead to supramastoid crest. Actually, anterior root of zygomatic process is a continuation of supramastoid crest. This is the articular tubercle because this is a tubercle anterior to temporomandibular joint. And so the name of tubercle is articular tubercle, and is the placement for attaching disc of TM joint. Please look at the temporal bone, the white bone, and You can name of the this suture, please. Who is volunteer for the name of this suture for other bones? The name of this suture, this one, and this one. It's very, very easy. Who is volunteer? Please activate your microphone and the name of the suture for other student. When the type of the suture is not very clear, one of the suture, which is the name, please activate your microphone and answer the question. Other student, Lubna. Lubna, please. Lubna Nabi Reshi. If I write, please activate your microphone. I wait you for activate microphone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Lubna, please tell me the name of this suture. Let's notice the bones.
Temporoparietal suture.
Yes, that's right. The name of suture is temporoparietal suture or squamous suture. Squamous suture. Lubna, please name of this suture. Tell me the name.
Temporosphenoidal suture.
Yes, or sphenotemporal suture. That's right. And this suture?
Temporo-occipital suture or occipitotemporal suture.
No, this is the mastoid portion.
Mastoido-occipital. Sorry. Mastoido-parietal suture.
Yes, mastoparietal, no, parietomastoid suture is right. And please tell me the name of this suture.
Occipito-mastoid suture or mastoido-occipital suture.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I repeat the name of suture. This suture is sphenotemporal suture. This suture is a squamous suture or parietotemporal suture. And this suture is parietomastoid suture. And finally, the last suture is the occipitomastoid suture. This is the zygomatic process. Zygomatic process is the inferior projection of a squamous part of temporal bone, and lead to anterior or lead to forward, and finally inserted to zygomatic bone, inserted to temporal process of zygomatic bone, and produce the zygomatic arch. This is the zygomatic arch. It's formed by two bones, temporal bone and zygomatic bone. This is the external acoustic opening or meatus lead to middle ear. And I told you the external acoustic meatus is formed by a squamous part and tympanic part. And in this picture, you can see a styloid process, this one. Styloid process is a sharp projection and it's the fourth part of temporal bone. This process is near 2.5 centimeter and it's for attaching muscles and ligament in the neck. For example, stylohyoid muscles and other muscles inserted to a styloid process. A styloglossus, a stylohyoid inserted to this projection. Another part of temporal bone or a third part of temporal bone is petromastoid part. Petromastoid part is subdivided two portions, mastoid portion and petrous portion. This is the mastoid portion. Mastoid portion lead to mastoid process. At the inferior, this is the mastoid process, and mastoid process is a placement for attaching sternocleidomastoid in neck, SCM muscles, and medial to mastoid process, there is a notch. This notch is called mastoid notch. Do you know which muscle is inserted to mastoid notch? You should study in musculoskeletal course. Repeat the question. Do you know which muscle inserted to mastoid notch? I told you a sternocleidomastoid inserted to mastoid process. Digastric, Lubna, thank you, Lubna. I put your positive, two positive for you. Posterior belly of digastric. Actually, posterior belly of digastric muscle inserted to mastoid notch or originate this mastoid notch. And in mastoid portion, there is a foramen, mastoid foramen for passing the emissary vein. Connected the venous drainage in outer and inside of the skull, and finally medial to mastoid notch, there is a groove. This groove, occipital groove for passing the occipital artery. In this picture is clear. This is the mastoid process. This is the mastoid notch, and this is the occipital groove for passing the occipital artery. But at the internal surface of mastoid portion, this is the mastoid portion, In the internal surface, there is a groove for sigmoid sinus. This is the sulcus for sigmoid sinus and mastoid portion. And sigmoid sinus is continuation of transverse sinus in the skull. But the third portion of temporal bone is a petromastoid portion. I explained about the mastoid portion, but this is the petros part. This is the petros part. Is here. It's located in the base of the skull, and the petros part has a apex, has a base, and has a tree surface: anterior surface, posterior surface, and has a inferior surface. Apex of petros is located between sphenoid and occipital bone, and near the apex you can see a foramen. This foramen, the name of foramen is foramen lastrum. Foramen lastrum forms between three bones: sphenoid, petros, and occipital bone. And this foramen is blocked by cartilage, and it's not opening foramina for passing nerve or vessels. It's blocked with cartilage. Please look at the anterior surface of petros. This is the petros, and this is anterior surface of petros. Is here, this one. In this picture, at the anterior surface of petros, near the apex, there is a depression for trigeminal ganglion. The name of depression area is trigeminal impression. And after the trigeminal impression, on the anterior surface of petros, there is a arcuate eminence. This is the arcuate eminence, and the arcuate eminence is created by superior semicircular canal in the inner ear. And lateral to arcuate eminence, there is a tegment tympani. A smooth area is located lateral to arcuate eminence, is called tegment tympani, and forms the roof of middle ear or tympanic cavity. And finally, on the anterior surface of petros, there are two sulcus. Sulcus for greater petrosal nerve, and sulcus for lesser petrosal nerve. The sulcus for greater petrosal nerve is located medially, but the lateral, the lesser petrosal nerve, the sulcus for lesser petrosal nerve is located laterally. It's here. And this is the inferior surface of petros. This is the petros part. And this is the inferior surface. On the inferior surface of petros, there is a circular opening for carotid canal. It's here. For passing the internal carotid artery from the neck and enter to a skull This here is foramen. And posterior to carotid canal, there is a jugular fossa. This is the jugular fossa. Jugular fossa from petrous, matching for jugular notch from the occipital bone. And this is the jugular fossa from petrous. This is the petrous. Match together and finally form jugular foramen. This is the jugular foramen. Is formed by two bones, petrous from temporal bone and occipital bone. From the jugular foramen, the nerve of vagus nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, accessory nerve, and internal jugular vein is passing from foramina between the neck and skull. This is the opening for carotid canal for passing the internal carotid artery in petrous, and the internal carotid artery from the neck passes or enters to skull from this foramina. And finally, in this slide, you can see posterior surface of petrous part. In the posterior part, there is a internal acoustic meatus or internal acoustic canal for passing the nerve of facial and nerve of vestibulocochlear, and for passing the labyrinthine artery is very important. You should know about content of vessel and nerve passing from this foramina. So on the posterior surface of petrous part, there is the internal acoustic meatus for passing nerve of 7, 8, and labyrinthine artery. And there is a subarcuate fossa. This is the arcuate fossa, and inferior to arcuate fossa on the posterior surface, there is a subarcuate fossa. It's here. And there is a aperture for aqueductal vestibuli, and this connection with labyrinthine sac and connection with ear, internal ear. The final part of temporal bone is a styloid process. The styloid process at the upper part is surrounded by a thin plate, is called vaginal process. Vaginal process is a thin bony structure surrounded the upper part of styloid process. And if this is the styloid process and this is the mastoid process, there is a foramen between this process. The name of foramen is stylomastoid foramen for passing the facial nerve. Chordotympani branch from the facial nerve is passing from this foramina. Please look at this video. After that, I continue the ethmoid bone.
Now that we've looked at the occipital bone, let's take a look at the temporal bone. It's quite a complicated bone. To see its full extent, we'll again remove the mandible. The temporal bone goes from here on the outside to here underneath.